How can I achieve financial independence? Now, financial independence is a term or concept that's grown in popularity a lot over the last few years. In its most basic sense, it means you've got more money coming in each month than you have going out. And usually we mean it from a passive income sort of standpoint. So you're not having to work anymore, you're not counting on a job or assistance from outside your own pool of assets, if you will, to have a living income. But it's more complicated than just having more cash coming in than going out. There's a host of factors like market forces, inflation, kids, your health, all sorts of things that income your ability to be financially independent. Now today, we're going to walk through some of these things like income, expenses. We're going to talk about some math you can use to figure out if you're financially independent. We'll talk about some passive income methods that are popular among the FIRE movement, if you've heard of that. And finally, we'll look at the most traditional, most common, simplest path to financial independence. All right, the first thing you need to know is how much you're going to spend. Now, if you've watched our other videos, you've probably heard me say this before, but for some reason people get hung up on income or their portfolio size before they think about how much they need to spend. And really, how much you spend determines how much you need, right? When you go to the grocery store, you don't show up with a few bucks to buy a cartload of groceries. You know you're going to need more than that because it costs more than that. Well, if you're going to spend $80, $90, $100,000 a year, you're going to need income to cover that every year. So that's where it starts with your spending. Your spending is going to determine how much you need to cover your cost of living every year, if you will. Now, to understand what your spending needs are, you're going to have to do a budget, or at least look back at bank statements, credit card statements, things like that, to get an idea of what your spending is. And once you have that amount on a monthly basis, go ahead and multiply it by 12. Get an annual number, because an annual number is going to give you a better picture of where you stand in relation to your income now, to your tax situation. There are just so many things that are already calculated, if you will, on an annual basis. You might as well go get your expenses that way too. All right, the second thing you need to know is how much money you'll have coming in. Now, if your only source of income right now is your job, it's pretty easy. You won't have anything else. But if you've got other things like rental properties, if you've got a trust or something where you're getting income from that, if you receive Social Security income already, any sort of outside sources, go ahead and factor that in. You want to deduct that from the expenses because that's going to be less of a gap for you to cover. In other words, let's say your annual expenses are $50,000, but you have $20,000 in income from outside sources already. Then whenever you become financially independent, or to become financially independent rather, you're going to need another $30,000 to cover that gap annually. That's the amount you need to pull from somewhere else. And you want to factor that other income in because it's going to have a huge impact on how much you ultimately have to save. All right, third step, after you have your expenses figured out, you have your other sources of income, you know that gap between your need and what you actually already have, multiply that gap number by 25. Now we use the number 25 because it's in line with the 4% rule. The 4% rule basically is a safe withdrawal rate that's popular in financial planning. 4% is also equal to 1/25. So to figure out how much we need in a large portfolio or a chunk of net worth to be able to withdraw or pull 4% of income from that annually, we multiply it by 25 to give us a number. So if you need $40,000 a year, you multiply that by 25, you get $1 million. Simple as pie. Now, if you plan to retire earlier or achieve financial independence in, say, your 50s or 40s or even 30s, you probably don't want to use the 4% rule. I'd go with something between 3.5% in your 50s, closer to 3% in your 40s, and below 40, maybe even lower, as low as 2%. That's going to be a more conservative withdrawal rate because you're going to have a longer horizon or a longer time in retirement, and you want a more conservative number to be sure you don't run out of money. Hey, if you haven't already, please click the like and subscribe buttons below. It helps our channel to grow and helps us teach other people about finance. All right, now the traditional way people get to financial independence is they build a nest egg of assets that's big enough to throw off enough income to basically provide for your way of life. For example, if you had $1 million, and let's say you've invested it and it returns 10% per year, that's $100,000 it's generating in the revenue or income or earnings by itself, right? It's not income you have to go earn from a job. It's just literally the assets growing, right? It's appreciation. It's exactly why you invest in the first place. The problem is, if you take $100,000 out of that account every year, it's not going to last 20, 30 years. I mean, if you draw down the principal, it's going to get lower and lower and smaller, and it's going to generate less and less income. That's why we have those conservative numbers we were talking about a second ago, the 4% rule, 3% rule, 2% rule. That lower withdrawal rate is going to give you a higher likelihood of success, or higher, in other words, a higher likelihood that you won't outlive your money. All right, there's an endless number of passive income ideas. I'm not listing them in this video. There are hundreds of people who've written blog posts, who have websites. You can go check that out. Just do a quick Google search on passive income ideas. Another method is real estate. This is one you'll see a lot on those passive income lists. I think real estate is a great investment idea. I've never done real estate personally, and the reason is it requires a lot of leverage to do it well. For example, let's just say you bought a $100,000 house and you paid cash and you can rent it out for $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year in revenue. And let's just say after taxes and expenses and maintenance and all that stuff, you're left with $8,000. Well, $8,000 on a $100,000 investment is 8%. Not bad, but you can really do as well or better in the stock market. And you won't get any calls about fixing toilets in the middle of the night and deal with all the other headaches that you have being a landlord. But when you use leverage, let's say you take a $20,000 investment and you put that down on a house, you get a $100,000 house and you borrow $80,000 from the bank. Your $20,000 investment, if it returns $8,000 a year, all of a sudden you've got a 40% return on your investment. That makes a lot more sense to me than 8%. And the way a lot of people do real estate is they start with something small. They allow their tenants to kind of pay for the mortgage or whatever on that property, and then they refinance or borrow again and keep growing their real estate portfolio, if you will, until it's producing enough income to basically cover all their needs. All right, now I want to tell you a little bit about what we've done in our family and kind of the way most people do it. When I was in college, I took a lot of business classes. That was my major. We talked about interest rates and finance and all these different things. Somewhere in there, it occurred to me that if I just built up a big enough pile of assets, right? Enough cash or stocks, investments, things like that, that it would generate enough income that I wouldn't have to work anymore. So let's throw a giant number out there. Let's say $5 million. But if a $5 million portfolio produced just 5% annually, that's $250,000. Let me check my math on that. Yeah, $250,000. I could live off $250,000 every year. You probably could too. And so I kind of thought, well, if I just save, eventually you build this juggernaut of a portfolio, this mass of money. And think of it this way. This is how I like to think of it. Every dollar you put in an investment portfolio or you save that is earning interest or generating a capital gain or growing in value somehow is like sending a little worker out into the field every day. And that little dollar, he's going and he's recruiting more dollars every day and he's bringing more back. And once he brings some dollars back, those dollars go recruit more dollars and those dollars recruit more dollars and so on and so on and so on. And eventually you build this pile of assets that's growing so fast, it outworks you. And one day you look up and you realize that this portfolio has brought in more money in a year than you did from your job. If you've ever played Monopoly, it's kind of like the guy that gets Park Place and Boardwalk, and you're playing the game, and there's this inevitability hanging over the game, which is why everybody else gets mad. Because the person who has those assets is eventually just going to bleed everyone else dry. Now, in real life, you're not bleeding anyone dry. You're participating in a growing economy where there's greater efficiency, where there's development, where there's innovation, where there's productivity, and you're just grabbing pieces of that through investments. Well, if you do that enough, you can build a portfolio that can outwork you. And that's a really exciting thing. But to get there, you have to pay yourself first. You have to make saving a priority. You can't do a budget where you spend everything you've got and then look to saving. You have to save first and then live off the rest. If you do them backwards, you'll never get to that point. And one day you'll get to a point where you realize that army of dollar bills makes more money than you do. And technically you can kick back. And that's financial independence. Because literally it's doing more than you can do yourself. That's a really great place to be. We got a lot more about financial independence on our website, martinmoney.com. We'll put a link to the written form of this video post on our website in the description below. If you would, also check out our social channels on the screen. As always, we're grateful for your interest in our videos. Have a great day.